Right, all right, all right. Okay. Well, I say it's not exactly ESPN's 30 for 30. Okay. But this is my 98 seasons in 98 days. Now, of course, the Giants, um, played 98 seasons. Okay. The season coming up, 2023, will be their 99th season. So I can't really go over that season because we haven't played it yet. But in 2024, that will be the 100th season in the history of the New York Football Giants, right? So they started in 1925. Okay. So we're forging ahead now. We're up to 1928, which was the fourth season in the history of the New York Giants. Now, the NFL started in 1920. Okay. So the NFL is always like 5 seasons long, longer or older than the Giants are. Okay. So this is the Giants' fourth season. Well, the NFL has been around since 1920, so this was the NFL's ninth season. Okay. 1928 was not a banner season for the Giants. And 1927, the video I did yesterday, they went 11-1-1, had a fantastic season. They won the championship. That was the Giants' first NFL championship. Now, back, from 1920 to 1932. Okay, so basically, I think the first 13 seasons, right? The NFL was in existence. The championship went to the team who had the best winning percentage at the end of the season. Okay, it wasn't like it is now. Everybody's got 17 games to play. It was kind of like you had to make your own schedule. A few times. I mean, if you look back at some of the amount of games that got played, like the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, seem to play a lot of games. They played like 17 games a couple times. It was a couple other teams that played like 4 games or 6 games. So there was no ties didn't count as far as in the winning percentage. They weren't like half a win and half a loss. So basically, it was a team who had the best winning percentage. Now, some teams had played 12, 13 games, and their winning percentage was based off of that. Other teams played 8 or 9 or 10 games, and their winning percentage was based off of that. So the team with the best winning percentage was crowned the NFL champion. Now, as I said, the Giants in 27, their winning percentage, I believe, if I remember correctly, was .917 because there were 11 wins, 1 loss, and 1 tie. Now, oddly enough, their one loss and their 1 tie in 1927 were to the Cleveland Bulldogs. For some reason, they just couldn't seem to beat them in 1927. But oddly enough, in 1925, the Giants' first victory ever in the NFL was over the Cleveland Bulldogs. We beat them 19-0. Hinkie Haynes scored the first Giants touchdown in 1925. 1925, the Giants lost the first 3 games. They got out. They lost 14-0, 14-0, and 5-3. I guess Babe Ruth hit a home run at the bottom of the 9th and beat them 5-3. But so the Giants' first 3 games in 1925 didn't even score a touchdown. It wasn't until the 4th game of the season where they actually scored. They scored 3 touchdowns. So in 1927 rolled around, their defense was phenomenal. They gave up in 13 games in 1927. The Giants' defense gave up 20 points. 13. They gave up 1.5 points per game. In 13 games, they had 10 shutouts. They gave up 3 touchdowns all season long. I don't know how you do that. They didn't give up a field goal. I'm sure other teams, they tried maybe kicking field goal, but there was not a successful field goal try against them. There was only 2 successful extra point tries against them, and they gave up 3 touchdowns. They gave up 1 touchdown in three separate games. They didn't give up a point in the first half of any football game in 1927. I don't know how you do that, but they did that. I mean, so by far the greatest defense. Sorry, Lawrence Taylor, you stink apparently. But the greatest defense in the history of the New York Football Giants, the 1927 team. Write it down. The worst defense was the 1966 team, who gave up 501 points. An average of almost 36 points a game. But when 1928 rolled around, okay, every year there was a different amount of teams. 1920, the first year the Giants were in the league, there was 20 teams. Okay. 1926, it went up to 22 teams. Okay. And teams kept coming and going. So it wasn't like the same 20. In 1925, we had 20 teams. So those 20 teams in 1926 were still there and they just added 2. No, it was team. I mean, in 1920, those 20 teams, it might have been 5 or 6 or so that disbanded, went bankrupt, and we had like 6 or 7 or 8 other teams join. It was just crazy. Teams took a year off, and they wouldn't be in there in 1926, and they come back in 1927. So it was just every year is different teams, different amount of teams, right? Each team played different amount of games, and it was the same thing in 1928. Okay, 1928. There was 10 teams. I was saying 1927, there was 12. 1928, they went down to 10. Okay. So 1928 NFL season was the 9th regular season in the history of the National Football League. So it was the 9th for the NFL. It was the 4th for the Giants. Right. The league dropped to 10 teams as the Cleveland Bulldogs, those were a thorn in the Giants' side in 1927. The Giants tied them once and beat them and lost to them once. Right. And the Duluth Eskimos both folded before the season, while the Rochester Jeffersons, after missing 2 seasons of play, also folded. And the Buffalo Bisons also had a year out from the league. Okay. However, the Detroit Wolverines, and Detroit Wolverines is key here. It's a key. Okay. They were added as an expansion team, okay, and they did very, very well, okay. The Providence Steamroller were named the NFL champions after finishing the season with the best overall record / winning percentage, okay. You got to have the winning percentage in there, okay. That's very important. All right, so in 1928, the 10 teams were the Chicago Bears, right, Chicago Cardinals, the Dayton Triangles, the Detroit Wolverines. So the Detroit Wolverines came in. This was their first year and also their last year. Okay. The Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, the Green Bay Packers, the New York Giants, the New York Yankees, which was also their last active season. Okay. The Pottsville Maroons and the Providence Steamroller. Okay. As I said, the Providence Steamroller, they wound up seeing, and this is the interesting. It said, see, the Dayton Triangles, they were 0-7. They only played 7 games. The Chicago Cardinals were 1-5. Obviously, they only played 6 games. The Frankfurt Yellow Jackets once again led the league in games played. They played 16 games. Okay, past couple of years, I think they were, remember correctly, they were playing 17 games. Right, so this year they played 16 games. All right, as I said, the Giants wound up playing 13 games. They were 4-7-2. All right, but the interesting thing is, as I'm trying to point out, okay, the Providence Steamroller were declared the champions. They had the best record, but they didn't have the most wins. But they had the best winning percentage. The Providence Steamroller were 8-1-2. Their winning percentage was .889. Okay. The Frankfurt Yellow Jackets won 11 games. However, they were 11-3-2. So their winning percentage was .786. The Detroit Wolverines, which was the expansion team, okay, which just came in and only played this one season. Okay, they were 7-2-1. They were in 3rd place. Their winning percentage was .778 for an expansion team. And not only that, okay, which is the very, 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 very big point here, okay, is that the Detroit Wolverines led the league. I mean, it's unbelievable. They were an expansion team. They came in 3rd place, very respectable. They led the league in scoring, which is going to be huge in a couple minutes from now, okay? But I mean, the Providence Steamroller were 8-1-2. So they didn't win the most games, okay? The Frankfurt Yellow Jackets did, but that's because the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets played 16 games. the Providence Steamroller only played 11. All right, but the Providence Steamroller had the best winning percentage, so therefore the Providence Steamroller in 1928 was declared the NFL champions. Okay. Now, the championship race, after 4 weeks, the Chicago Bears and the Detroit Wolverines were both unbeaten. On October 21st, the Green Bay Packers beat the Bears 16-6, leaving Detroit, the expansion team, the Detroit Wolverines, the expansion team, okay, at 2-0-0 at the top of the standings. On November 3rd, near Philadelphia, the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets at 4-1-0 hosted the Detroit Wolverines, who were 3-0, and beat them 25-7. The next day, okay, the Detroit Wolverines lost to the Providence Steamroller, okay, 7-0, okay, and the Yellow Jackets and the Steamrollers were both tied at the lead at the end of the week, at the end of week 7, okay. Then Frankfurt played a series against Pottsville in week 8, winning 19-0 at home and 24-0 on the road for a 7-1-1 record, okay. That put them in first place at Providence. In week 9, on November 18th, the Providence Steamroller at 5-1-1 hosted the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, who were 7-1-2. They hosted them in Rhode Island, right? Providence, Rhode Island, in a regular season game that ultimately would determine which team would win the NFL championship. Providence's 6-0 win put the Steamroller in first place, and it didn't lose any of its last 3 games, finishing at 8-1-2, while Frankfurt finished second at 11-3-2. Had the Yellow Jackets beaten the Steamrollers, their records at the season end, okay, the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets beat the Providence Steamroller, the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets record would have been 12-2-2, and the Providence Steamroller would have been 7-2-2. And therefore, Frankfurt would have been named the champions. Okay, because they would have been 12-2, Providence would have been 7-2, right? Because so therefore Frankfurt would have had the better winning percentage, but the Providence Steamroller won 6-0, okay, which wound up being basically the difference in the season. Okay, so they were declared the winners. Okay. Let's see, the ties were not officially counted in the standings until 1972, so a tie didn't count. Basically, didn't count at all, right? And according to here, it didn't look like there was any major rule changes, anything of the sort, okay? But the 1928 New York Giants, okay, now here. The 1928 New York Giants, with the franchise's 4th season in their history, okay? The team finished at a very disappointing 6th place. They were 4-7-2. After winning the title in 1927 at 11-1-1, okay, the Giants played 2 games against the Detroit Wolverines and failed to win either one of them, okay. the expansion Detroit Wolverines, they lost to the Detroit Wolverines 28-0 at the University of Detroit Stadium, okay. Oddly enough, the University of Detroit Stadium, I believe, the 1935 NFL championship game was played at the University of Detroit Stadium. The Detroit Lions beat the New York Giants in the NFL championship game in 1935. They beat I think it was 26-7. They just whooped up on the Giants. Let's see. Then the Giants they played the Detroit Wolverines at the Polo Grounds. Okay, and they tied them 19-19. Okay, so they played the Detroit Wolverines, the expansion team, 2 times, and they couldn't beat them either time. All right. The Giants started the season off okay. They started off 2-0. All right. They beat the Pottsville Maroons 12-6 in the first week of the season. And week 2 in Green Bay, they won their first 2 games, and they were both on the road. So they beat at City Stadium. They beat the Green Bay Packers 6-0. But then they lost their next 2 games. They lost. They played actually their first 5 games for the Giants. We're all on the road. First 5 games. So we're complaining about the 2023 season. Huh? How would you like to play the first 5 games on the road? They played at Pottsville. They played at Green Bay, at Chicago, at Detroit, and at the New York Yankees. The New York Yankees obviously played where the New York Yankees played, which was in Yankee Stadium. The Giants played at the Polo Grounds, where oddly enough, the New York baseball Giants played. Okay. But the Giants, the New York Football Giants, first 5 games of the 1928 season were all on the road. Okay, so as I said, so we're complaining about their schedule nowadays. Okay, it was even a little tougher back then. All right, but I said it's in week 5 against the New York Yankees at Yankee Stadium. The Giants won. Okay, they won 10-7, so they were up. They were 3-2. And then week 7, okay, they played 2 games, and basically. Looks like they played Sunday and Tuesday. November 4th, okay, they played home against the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets and they tied them 0-0, thus putting the Giants at 3-2-1. Okay, 2 days later, the Giants played the Pottsville Maroons on a Tuesday. All right, so we complain about, some of the players complain and all that. And I understand, totally understand. But they complain about playing Sunday and being all banged up and wanting to play, not wanting to play on Thursday because they're still beat up. And I understand. I'd be the same way. Well, back here, the Giants played November 4th at home against the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, and they tied them. 2 days later, on Tuesday, they played the Pottsville Maroons, and they won 13-7. So after they won 13-7, okay, the record was 4-2-1. Okay. The following week on November 11th against the Detroit Wolverines, okay, once again, the Detroit Wolverines came to town and they tied the Giants. Okay, the Giants were 4-2-2. All right, so you look, the Giants were 4-2-2. Okay, which would have put them right in the thick of the race because the Providence Steamroller won. They were 8-1-2. So the Giants at 4-2-2. Okay, would have been right in the thick. They would have been like almost tied for first place after 8 weeks. They would have been tied for first place. Okay, but this is kind of where, they wound up losing the last 5 games of the season, right? And see, well, week 9, okay, they lost. They played the Green Bay Packers. Now, they beat the Green Bay Packers on the road in week 2. They beat them 6-0 on the road. Well, when the Packers came to town and played in the Polo Grounds where the Giants play it, the Packers won 7-0, putting the Giants at 4-3-2. Maybe had some type of a way outside shot, okay, at winning the title at 4-3-2. But what pretty much doomed them was the following week, okay, they played at Providence. Okay, they lost 16-0 in the Cyclodrome, which obviously Providence wound up winning the championship. So Providence was very, very good. Okay, so the Giants traveled to Providence, lost 16-0. Okay, and fell to 4-4-2 with 3 games left in their season, and that pretty much did them in. Once they went to 4, once they got that 4th loss, it was over with. Okay. Then the following week, okay, the Giants played on December 2nd. They played the New York Yankees at the Polo Grounds, okay, and they lost 19-13, with the Giants at 4-5-2. All right. Then they played on December 8th, okay, they played the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets on a Saturday, okay, because I believe it was in Frankfurt. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Frankfurt could only play their home games, I think, on Saturday. I don't think they could play on Sunday. Because I remember the past couple of years, the Giants, they would play home and home with Frankfurt. They would play on a Saturday. Let me see here, 1927. I know they did it in 27. I know they did. I got to just find the scores here. Yeah, okay. Frankfurt did not play home games on Sunday. I don't know if it was a law or exactly what it was, but they would not play home games on Sunday. They played their home games on Saturday. So what the Giants did, I think it was 2 years in a row. Might have been 26. Let me see. They didn't do it in 25, did they? Oh, my God. Look at that. Hold on here. Hold on. Let me get 26 out of here. Yep. 3 years in a row. So I don't know why they stopped. But in 1925, Okay, the Giants played home and home against the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, okay, which was their second and third games they played in existence. They played Frankfurt on a Saturday. Then the next day they played on a Sunday, they played Frankfurt Yellow Jackets once again, okay, 1925. 1926, they played the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets on October 16th in Frankfurt. On October 17th, the next day, they played Frankfurt Yellow Jackets in New York. 1927, they played the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets on Saturday, October 22nd. On Sunday, October 23rd, they played the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets once again in New York. Okay, so in 1928, this was the first season that they didn't play back-to-back games against the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. All right, but so on December 8th, Saturday, December 8th, they played at the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. They lost 7-0, okay, in Frankfurt Stadium. And then they finished their season in Yankee Stadium against the Yankees. Okay, figure that, right? On December 16th, and they lost 7-6. Okay. But, okay, the Giants played 2 games against the Detroit Wolverines and failed to win either game. Okay. As I said, they lost 28-0 in Detroit. Okay. And then they tied them 19-0 at the Polo Grounds, 19-all at the Polo Grounds, right? But at the season's end, okay, the Giants owner, Tim Mara, bought the entire Detroit franchise, okay, mostly, okay, to secure the services of star tailback Benny Friedman, okay, and merged the 2 clubs under the Giants name, okay. So Friedman, he became a huge star for the Giants. He played 3 seasons for the Giants. And you'll notice that the Giants, let's see, what did they do? They scored 79 points. Okay, so that they were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They were the 7th best offense, right? So there's 6 other teams scored over 100 points. Okay, the Detroit Wolverines scored 189 points. The Detroit Wolverines in 10 games scored 189 points. The Giants in 13 games scored 79 points. Okay, so their star tailback is basically the reason why. So they went out. Tim Mara went out and bought their team. But not only that, but he also kept the services of their coach. Okay, Earl Pottinger, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, is the Giants head coach for 2 seasons. Okay. He's the first multiple season head coach for the Giants. Bob Folwell, 1925, okay, was the Giants' initial head coach. They wound up 8-4, right? He wasn't there in 1926. Doc Alexander was the Giants' coach in 1926, and they were 8-4-1. Earl Pottinger, who also plays for the Giants as well, he became their coach, okay, and in 1927, he played for him. He played for him in 1928 as well, too, okay? But he led them to the championship at 11-1-1, okay? But he was Pottinger, Earl Pottinger. I think that's how it's either Pottinger or Pottinger. He was there, he coached them in 1928. So he's their first multiple year coach in the history of the New York Football Giants, right? But Roy Andrews was the coach of the Detroit Wolverines. Tim Mara bought the team, okay? And starting in 1929, Leroy Andrews coached the Giants for 2 seasons. He coached them for 1929 and 1930. For some reason, I don't know why, the last 2 or 3 games of the 1930 season, he wasn't the coach. Okay, we had an intern coach, interim coach, right? But for the last 2 or 3 games of the 19, so I'm not sure why he wasn't there for the last 2 or 3 games. But Leroy Andrews, who was coaching the Detroit Wolverines in 1928, became the Giants head coach in 1929. Okay, but you'll start noticing, okay, that in 1929, 30, and 31, the Giants offense really started taking off. I mean, what was it, 79 points they scored? Yeah, they scored 79 points, okay, in 1928. I mean, absolutely really, really bad. They scored 197 points in 1927. Okay. But quite possibly the worst thing of all, okay, for the Giants, okay, was their defense. All right. They gave up 136 points, which was not unbelievably horrible, but it put them at what number? They were the sixth worst. No, right? No. Oh no, yeah, they were the ninth worst team. The New York Yankees gave up more points than the Giants did. They were the only other team. So the Giants gave up 136 points, which is the second worst in all of the 1928 season. But if you take also this into consideration, okay, the Giants, the first 3 seasons combined, gave up about 136 points. Now let's add this up here. Okay, the Giants gave up they gave up 67 points in 1925. 67, 1925. 1926, they gave up 51. 67, 118. They gave up 118 points in their first 2 seasons. Okay. Their third season, 1927, the year they went 11-1-1 and won the championship, they gave up 20 points. So the Giants, in their first 3 seasons in existence on defense, gave up 138 points. The first 3 seasons combined. Okay. In the 1928 season, they gave up 136 points. Right. I said, not only, I mean, but everything changed. I mean, the amount of points they scored, they fell over like by 120 points. They scored 120 points less. Now, in today's, that would be really pretty bad. I mean, they scored like 450 in 2020, and they scored 330 the next year in 2021. That would be bad. But back then, you score 120 points less in one season, from one season to the next. I mean, that's suicide, right? So they had to do something about it. So as I said, Tim Mara, okay, went out of his way and he bought the Detroit Wolverines, merged them with the New York Giants, and starting in 1929, the Giants offense really shot up a lot. Now they didn't necessarily win any championship games while their offense really did good. They wouldn't win their next championship until 1934. Okay. But they certainly became a lot better, and the defense started getting better too. But I mean, the first 3 years they did very well. They were 8-4-0, then they were 8-4-1, then they were 11-1-1. So for them to go 4-7-2, it is what it is. But things were changing, right? I'm not exactly sure. I don't remember exactly how many teams were in the league in 1929, but I said every year. 1925, there was 20 teams. 1926, it was 22 teams. 1927, it went to 12 teams. And in 1928, it went down to 10 teams. Okay, so thankfully, the Giants were still one of those teams, okay, that was still able to be able to play. I mean, because the biggest problem back then was attendance. Now, if we look, the Giants, let's see here. If I can... Let's see here, 1928. Does it show? Does it show the attendance? Games and schedules. Not sure. Now, let's see here. Recap. No, well, I mean, let's see here. Okay, the first game of the season, they had 7,000 people there. Okay, the second game of the season, they had 7,000 people. Let's see, the third game of the season, they had 15,000 people. So the big problem is attendance, and a lot of times just to get people into the stadium. Okay, I mean, I remember they sold programs there. I'm sure they probably had whatever, hot dogs and maybe pretzel, peanuts and stuff like that. So they had to sell stuff like that. That was very, to make some extra money, Okay. But I remember they also had to give away tickets sometimes just to get some people in the stands. Well, give away tickets, and maybe while the people were there, maybe they would spend some money, right? Because if you didn't sell enough tickets, you didn't have enough income. You couldn't pay your players, right? You couldn't buy your uniforms, footballs. You couldn't wash you couldn't travel. How are you supposed to, not have the whole team travel? And they got to eat. So how are you going to pay that if you have no money, right? Like I said, you got to pay your players. I mean, they didn't make a lot of money, but so that was the one big problem, is that especially if you couldn't get enough games, you didn't make enough money, right? Or if you couldn't get enough people in the stands, right? I said sometimes maybe there was attendance, maybe it might have been 4,000 or 5,000 people, but they might have gave maybe 500 or 1,000 of those tickets away, right? So that was it was a huge problem, and the Giants were very, very lucky that during those times that they were able to avoid having to fold, especially once we got into the early 30s, when the Depression was there, right? I mean, that was a killer, absolute killer, but the Giants managed to hang in there. So, well, guys, that wraps up the 1928 season for the New York Football Giants. Unfortunately, it wasn't a good one. They were 4-7-2. It was a stinker, but they wouldn't. I recall they wouldn't really have another stinker for quite some time. So there were better times ahead for the Giants. The defense was going to get better. Their offense was going to score a lot more points, and it would take them a few years before they would win another championship. But there were certainly better times ahead for the New York Football Giants in the 1928 football season. So, well, guys, that wraps it up. And I'll be back again tomorrow night with my 98 seasons in 98 days, which will be the 1929 season, which was the 5th season in the history of the New York Football Giants. I'll see you then.